The Galactic Empire was the culmination of everything that Darth Sidious and the entirety of the Sith had been working towards for a millennium. It was the ultimate goal and the grand trophy of the Sith. So why was it that Sidious was ultimately disappointed with how his empire turned out? Greetings and welcome back to the archives. 1,000 years of training all funneled into one Dark Lord, and this Sith Lord spent the better part of 30 years perfectly setting up and executing the grand plan of the Sith. The revenge of the Sith was complete, and the Jedi were no more. It had been quite a swift triumph, and now the galaxy solely belonged to their new Emperor. Darth Sidious. Palpatine had big plans for the Empire, and the Death Star was only the beginning. He was aiming towards immortality and to reshape the galaxy in his own divine image. And yet, the Empire he found himself running was grossly underwhelming. Palpatine's continual daily frustrations with how things were running was compounding each and every day. Even though he was on top of the galaxy, the power he now held was not enough to quench the burning furnace of his anger that he felt towards his greatest accomplishment and how it was turning out. An utter disappointment of his perfect image. So why exactly was this? Why was Darth Sidious infuriated, frustrated, and disappointed with his grand empire? And what were the major reasons for his critiques? The source we have today comes from the Book of the Sith, where Sidious scrawls his commentary in the margins of the entire book. Sprinkled throughout the works are various side comments that clue us into how Sidious actually felt about his empire. Where we get the most perspective is when he is writing commentary inside of his own chapter in the Book of the Sith. The first quote we can begin with is that at the beginning of the novel itself, where Sidious writes this: "At the time I write these words, I hoped my empire would provide limitless reach. Yet, I must still rely on others to do my bidding, and they are so often foolish, flawed, and disappointing." This is our first indication of what Sidious actually got versus what he expected in the end. Keep in mind, Sidious says this about his underlings, as this will be a consistent problem that creates the through line of Sidious's issues with his empire. Having first conquered the Republic with all of his subterfuge and manipulation, Darth Sidious had assumed that he was finally going to have limitless reach that he desired for so long. Having to work in the shadows as a Sith for the majority of his life saw him having to use proxies and a complicated underground network of contacts for him to get anything done, as he personally was unable to work. While at the time he didn't mind it, now it was becoming a nuisance. Now, Emperor Sidious was the law, and could change the law as he desired. In his mind, this theoretically should have allowed him to reach to extend all the corners of the galaxy, and would never be denied what he desired. So what was it that Sidious desired? Well, knowledge, usually. With the resources that the Empire had, Sidious should have been able to pierce every dark corner of the galaxy to find long-lost knowledge and power hidden away for centuries. Not to mention all the resources that could be gained from systems in the Outer Rim, in unknown regions that were typically closed off to the rest of the galaxy. And yet, this just wasn't the case. One of the biggest problems impeding his research was the Imperial Senate itself, a Senate which took Sidious 19 years to fully dissolve. Despite the fact that he was the Emperor, he still had to play his cards right within the Senate until he could completely oust them and replace their influence with the Imperial governors. But until such a time, he still had to be careful, even as Emperor. Sidious notes in the book that he wished that he had dissolved the Senate a lot sooner, but that wasn't his only impediment. As he mentioned, he was still forced to work through servants, but they weren't as efficient enough for his taste. They didn't have the know-how to get things done properly, and it wasn't as though Sidious could go and do everything himself. Putting his Sith pride aside, he was an emperor. Running the galaxy was a full-time job, and it wasn't like he was getting a whole lot of help from Vader running it, who, at this point in time, was still moping about Padme and had become so obsessed with hunting and killing Jedi survivors that the Empire itself meant merely nothing to him. Palpatine's greatest critique of Lord Vader. Vader did not desire to rule anything. He desired to conquer his past self. Speaking of Jedi, the Inquisitors weren't very useful either, and were not all that helpful with Vader hunting and killing the remaining Jedi. We spoke of earlier why Sidious actually despised the Inquisitors, and we can revisit this quote from him. Grand Inquisitor Torben is the latest of these fools to perish. A bomb, a speeder crash, drowning, in death. My Inquisitors are making a mockery of their empire's infallibility. When Palpatine needed the Inquisitors to break Vader free of his obsession with the Jedi, they failed him. The Inquisitors were valuable to a point, but often died swiftly and embarrassingly, in a way that left Palpatine himself humiliated. As well as this, furthering Vader's obsession with killing Jedi. But it only got worse. Emperor Palpatine was facing insurgency issues on the newly conquered worlds that he had claimed. Palpatine used fear to keep his citizens in line. However, he began becoming more and more infuriated when the inefficiency and ineptitude began to creep into his higher ranks. About this, he had to say, "It is maddening educating this rabble. With the Empire now nearly a generation old, my Imperial Governor should at least understand the principle of the law of fear. And yet, I would have better success trying to teach Obresh to a Gungan." We are fully aware of this, especially with worlds like Lothal, as the Ghost Crew was able to wreak havoc on the planet, and eventually fully win it back from the Empire. The Prime Minister was unable to quell the insurgency, and so was Agent Callus from the ISB. Not even the Inquisitors, 3 of them in fact, and still, it took Grand Admiral Thrawn to make a real dent. To summarize, we could basically wrap all of this up into one final quote by Darth Sidious concerning all of the Empire. The defining quote says this: "My Empire, so perfect in vision, has at times proved infuriating in its implementation, because of the fact of the sloth and stupidity of my underlings. Even Vader, my minor masterpiece, is often weak and indecisive. It is fortunate that I have an eternity to outlive my errors." And there it is. Not only was Palpatine collecting Sith artifacts and knowledge for the fun of it, rather, he was desperately researching the secret to immortality, the essence transfer technique discovered by Darth Bane and lost by the foolish Sith Lord Darth Gravid. Sidious, in his mind, believed that he had to start from the ground up to rebuild his empire, to outlive those that were still greedy, rebuild a new generation completely indoctrinated to his sole will. While Sidious still had a treasure trove of Sith knowledge, perfect immortality still always eluded him, causing him to grow more and more frustrated with the constant fires he was having to put out in his massively imperfect empire. With 1,000 years of Sith plotting ultimately leading to a disappointment, even in the eyes of their Emperor. A cruel, dark reality for this Sith Lord. But now, my friends and acolytes, what are your thoughts on Sidious's utter disappointment with his empire? Versus, of course, what he had in his mind. What are your thoughts on the insurgencies and the incompetency of his underlings, as well as Vader and the Inquisitors? Was Sidious right to be as furious as he was about the resulting empire? And would his true empire truly have been unstoppable? As always, my friends, if you haven't yet subscribed, I would implore you to do so, as it helps the channel out a great deal. And as always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.